All right. Well, I'm going to put up the a screensaver we had for those of you just coming in, and just for the people on who'll be joining us later on Zoom. There we go. Kelo Rinpoche, a famous teacher. He even has a new Kelo Rinpoche who's teaching as well. Yeah, after he graduated from this body, we have a new younger Kelu now. That's how the Tibetans do it. Well, okay. I don't want that. Uh, get my stuff straight here. Working with every once in a while. It's surprising here. All right. Kelu was a great Tibetan teacher. He was a primary teacher to the two American Khenpos, I call them, Ken Wilber and Ken MacLeod. Both of these great Buddhists, American Buddhists, studied under Kelu Rinpoche. And then the Dalai Lama himself. He was a teacher to the Dalai Lama himself. And so I wanted to start with his quote. I just love the picture of Rinpoche. But he says, when it's time to die, we lack the foundation of a stable practice. We go to death in fear and anguish. That's sort of a hard teaching, but we have to hear hard teachings every once in a while. And it plays into, basically, I'm sort of a one note Johnny here. I have one song, and that is trying to help people who come in here create their own stable spiritual practice. And stability is important when you face diagnoses, when you face your marriage breaks up, when you face your countries begins to disappear. It doesn't matter what we're talking about. We face a lot of tumultuous things in a lifetime as humans. And if you have a stable spiritual practice, it makes all the difference in the world. When Ken MacLeod uh, traveled to India in 1970 to start his spiritual journey, he showed up at Kelu Rinpoche's, and he was a Westerner speaking English, and through translator, Kelu asked him. He said, uh, "Are you a tourist, or are you have you come to work?" And Ken said, "Oh, I came to study." He said, "Good." He said, "We don't need any more tourists here." And and that's to create a stable practice, and it is a creative thing to have a spiritual practice. It's got to fit you, and it's a creative thing. We have thousands of years of models of spiritual practice. Every major religion, when you get down to the contemplative level and the mystic level, they have spiritual practices. Doesn't matter, Christianity, Judaism, oldest, Hindu, Buddhist came later, the Sufis. Those are the ones I know the best. And they all have models for spiritual, but they're available now. Where before, I mean, the last 50 years, everything's available. And the point is to use what's available and create for yourself uh, a spiritual practice that fits you. Um, I've got three short poems today for our talk, and the first two of them came out this week as I was just sitting with Kalu's wisdom there, and looking at his picture, and a couple of poems came. The first one is creating your spiritual practice, and it's got a little tagline to it from Rumi. Yeah. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground. It's a beautiful line from Rumi. Rumi says, today, like every other day, we wake up empty and afraid. The royal we there, including Rumi. Today, like every other day, we wake up empty and afraid. Don't rush to your desk and begin working. Instead, take down a musical instrument. Make what you love be what you do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground. Uh, that's an image of the ground of being, of course, the deepest truth. There are hundreds of ways, let's say thousands, hundreds of thousands of ways now that we are, Rumi was in the 13th century. They had limited amount of information, but we have a lot available to find a way that you can connect with all of this, with the sacred. And what that means. Well, here's the poem, Creating Your Spiritual Practice. And I have to, my eyes are not as good as they used to be. I'm not telling any of you anything you don't know. Creating your spiritual practice. We come to this work because the alternative, being consumed with the effort to ignore the sacred mystery of being, eventually leads to a growing disease. We come to this work because the alternative, being consumed with the effort to ignore the sacred mystery of being, eventually leads to a growing disease. To glimpse what is ultimately true is not difficult, but to stabilize that view and to live accordingly is a labor of love that ultimately leads to joy. There's the choice right there. Do you want to lead a life where you just basically ignore the sacred? You ignore our culture is pretty good at that. We give you all kinds of a lot of things to put your attention on, and before you know it, the day is over. Do you want to ignore the sacred? And it's a mystery, and it's about your being and the being of all of this. Do you want to keep ignoring that, or in that case, you will end up feeling more ill at ease. That's another way to put it: ill at ease. Okay, or to glimpse the ultimate truth is not difficult. We've all had these little breaks in our deflector shield for truth. That is our childhood operating system. We had to have this to get out of to survive the family and get out into the world, and we've all had a glimpse of the truth. One of the most famous glimpses of the truth was Thomas Merton on the street corner in March of '58. He was leaving the doctor's office and was going ahead to go drink some bourbon and et cetera. And then everything for a moment just flashed. It's the only spiritual experience I know that's on a historical marker. It's on the corner of 4th and Muhammad Ali now, and he was the Buddha's experience. He realized, and he wrote about it. That's the only, that's the beautiful thing that part of Merton's spiritual practice was writing, as is mine, and he wrote about it, and then he eventually came out in a book after he was. After he graduated in 1968, he wrote about it, and he said, he saw all these people there. He was in the middle of the shopping district, so-called, in Louisville, and he had left New York City for the monastery 17 years earlier, convinced you couldn't find God in a crazy city, and so he went behind these walls in this secluded monastery. He thought it was the only way you could find it. Well, by that time, the walls were getting a little narrow, and he'd lost that romantic vision. But he did good work. If you're a Trappist, you show up seven times a day, 8 including mass, and you chant sacred poems, essentially the Psalms. That's their work, and then manual labor too, cutting wood at that time. You know, working in the fields. So work and labor. I mean, prayer and labor were what he did for 17 years. But he was sort of thinking maybe he bet on the wrong horse. But then he had this experience, and that's it. We've all had glimpses, but this was a magnificent glimpse. And when he wrote about it, he said the whole uh, illusion of a separate holy existence is a dream. That's what the Buddha woke up from. The idea that we have, that our existence is separate from all this, separate from all this. And Merton had that same thing. And he said, he said, all these people were shining like the sun. I loved all these people. They were mine and I theirs. But again, he had the glimpse of the oneness. Okay. And we've all had that sort of. Maybe, it came when you saw the Grand Canyon. Who knows? We've had it. But it's that's not so difficult, and it's actually the sacred breaking through all the time. Any chance it gets, this little crack in our defense system, the grace comes through, and we have a feeling of the sacred oneness. Okay, that's not difficult. It happens to everybody. You got to admit that. But to stabilize that view and to live accordingly is a labor of love that ultimately leads to joy. If you have these experiences, it is an experience of kind of joy and oneness, but then it goes. And so, spiritual practice, serious spiritual practice, you stabilize everything. Well, Merton did that. He's another example of one guy who did it. There's many, but he's a local boy here. He's what brought me to Kentucky. And so I read a lot of them. And the last 10 years of his life, he switched what he was writing about from contemplative monastic stuff. He realized he couldn't be separate from all these people. That was an illusion, the monk, And so he was writing about racism. He was writing about sexism. He was writing about war, peace, atomic bomb, none of which the Trappist censors allowed him to publish. So for the last 10 years of his life, when he wrote arguably the best stuff of his career as a writer, none of it came out in his lifetime, but it didn't matter. Part of his spiritual practice was writing about what mattered, and now he enlarged his field of vision. You see, that's part of what happens when you stabilize the spiritual practice. You get more space, and the world becomes larger. And so he was writing about that. And I think Merton was one modern guy who actually did that. I could list off for the rest of our time together the mystics and all the tradition who also did it. Yeah. And so, but the key is if you don't do it, you end up with a kind of growing dis-ease about aging. Who doesn't feel that from time to time? And then it's, being in active dying is every bit as momentous as your mother in labor giving birth. It's labor both ways. Okay, but in this case, if you have the stability of a spiritual practice, it's a labor of love while you're maintaining it, and then actually what comes out is a sense of joy going into this next phase. The monks are called graduation. Going into whatever's next. Who knows what that is? But they prepare for it to be able to do it with a kind of joy. Yeah, that's what hangs in the balance. I'm going to just tell you the spiritual practice that has coalesced for me, and then I'm going to encourage you to work on your own. It's simple. There's really 5 things here, and the mandalas that we often use, the square with the north, south, east, west. The way the Tibetans, that's the most stable view of the universe that Tibetans know. And so they have these 4 points, and then they have the center. Okay. And that's how I arrange my practice. That basically is my practice. And it's my labors of love, reading and sitting, writing and teaching. And in the very middle is listening. That's ultra simple, and you want yours to be ultra simple too, because simple goes deep. So, for instance, today I got up, did some spiritual reading, the way I start today, uh, and mostly I'm reading folks centuries ago. I'm reading the Upanishads now. Uh, you know, probably the earliest sacred text. Uh, the the Indians were very interesting people. Uh, they didn't keep good records because they had this sense of vast time. So you don't get any kind of precision. It is really a vast view, but it all comes down to this oneness. They called it Brahman, Atman. Different ways of languaging it throughout the years. You know, uh, shamans from probably 20,000 years have been breaking through either to the big picture up there or the big picture down there. And uh, and so we've had these people who've had these glimpses, and they actually became sort of helpers for people in the tribe. So this has been going on for a long time. But the the Upanishads and the Vedas, they're probably the earliest written text. And after that's Buddhism and Christianity and Islam and Judaism. Those are five of those aren't all of them, but those are five pretty major ones. But for me, it's reading. And so I'm reading something. I want to be, again, listening is the center of everything. So when I read, I'm listening to a voice on the page, usually of some mystic from the 14th century. I'm not, I do read the news in the afternoon usually of the day because, as Gandhi said, that was part of his spiritual practice. He would read the London Times and the Delhi Times. He said, if you don't know what people are suffering, how can you develop your compassion? So I do read the newspaper, but mostly I read sacred text in the morning, and there's just a wide variety of that. If you don't have something, to read, you should all have the complete Rumi by Coleman Barks, the Essential Rumi. You could always just read a poem. You'd have time for that, just to listen to the words of somebody who has stabilized his practice. Of course, Rumi's guys whirl because he whirled in grief. He whirled around the pillar in the mosque. He had this terrific grief. He is a grief master. If you're in grief now, you should have the Essential Rumi by Coleman Barks. And you could always keep, I have mine here. You can always keep that handy if you don't have time to read a lot. Read a poem by Rumi. Today, like every other day, we wake up empty and afraid. Yeah, I'll give you another Rumi at the end. So that's reading. Sitting is just formal meditation. You just and that's in the center of our practices here. We'll sit in this silence and listen. And listening has to do with the heart and awareness. Those are all three in the same bailiwick. So we just the mind talks all the time. I'm talking now. The mind's in play, but when we sit in silent meditation or contemplation, as they call it in the Christian tradition, there's no words. It's wordless. Okay, and I do that a couple times a day. I do it in the morning before I don't turn on any devices. Maybe I'm reading from the Upanishads, and then I'll go and sit for usually half hour in the morning. I'll do 20 minutes when my day is done and before going to supper. That's just me. At least to sit. The time doesn't matter. It matters mostly that you show up every day and spend some time in the silence and simplicity of just trying to connect to the sacred. Okay. Writing, uh, I normally write throughout the day, but when I sit and I come out, and then I'll just write for about 10 minutes, just anything that comes out. There's numbers of ways you can do this, but writing somehow it's, um, even though Jesus, we had no idea that Yeshua, Jesus, wrote anything. He was teaching all the time, but he said, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. So, this image of bringing forth, you know, about 10,000 years ago, uh, all over this planet, shamans probably went down below Earth into caves and took something from the inside and put it on the cave wall. That was the beginning of, that was the first time that what a person knew and experienced didn't die with them, you see. And that was the beginning of all the arts. You take some, maybe you're a painter. I have a woman who's one of her spiritual practices is painting. She comes here and does a retreat, uh, and then she unifies it all in a work of art. Janet Ferguson's her name. She's comes from Cincinnati. She's been working with me, but that's how she does it. So this is very creative. She's actually closer to the cave wall. She's putting it in pictures and words. Yeah. So writing just means that bringing forth something. Maybe you write a journal. Maybe you write one haiku a day. It doesn't matter. It's somehow you're bringing it out. Maybe you draw a picture. Yeah. So that's bringing forth every day something from the inside, because the sacred is deep down on the inside, your connection to the inside. And the last one is teaching. I mean, that's what I'm doing right now. These are the four things that really matter to me. Uh, Last week we talked about gradually figuring out what matters and what doesn't matter at all. I mean, I brought in wood for the fire, and things like that. You keep the roof over your head, you pay your bills. Those all matter, but what really our job is as we go in the second half of life is find out what really matters and what doesn't matter at all. Okay. So those are mine. And I really challenge you to get that simple where you could just put 5 words like reading, sitting, listening, writing, and teaching, that you can actually boil it down to where you're really clear on what matters. I do those things every day. And that just feels wonderful. Being here with you is part of my joy. Thanks for being here. Now, there's a few additional supports, no matter how you arrange. Maybe you have 6, maybe you have 8. There's the Jewish tradition, their mystic tradition. They have the tree of life that has 10. You know, it's creative, but boil it down, and then spend your time doing what matters. Now, you need some support too. 3 additional supports would be this, what right now, to have a community. Very few people, I mean, uh, Merton was in community for 17 years, and he always felt he was a member of uh, a tradition, his community, even though he ended up living as a hermit apart from the community. That was just part of his development. But to have a community, you guys are my beloved community. That's what I call you, because I wouldn't have written anything this week if I didn't have to prepare to teach. And so a community is important. You might have others. You might be in a 12-step community. You might be in a church community. I mean, I know a guy in Cincinnati who the heart of his spiritual practice is daily mass. He goes to daily mass. I'm sure we have a guy on this thing that says daily mass up in Indianapolis. These are spiritual practices. Showing up once a week for an hour, it obviously doesn't make it. So, what do you do every day? Okay, so community. Intensive retreats are important. That's why we have built into our community usually the second Saturday of every month, where we do a Saturday morning retreat where you have a time to go a little deeper, sit a little bit more, write a little bit more. So intensive retreats wherever you can do them. I've done years of those, and I'm continuing. February, I'm going to go to a 4-day retreat at Loretto, centering prayer retreat. It's important every once in a while to people come here for that. I've got somebody coming on Wednesday and Thursday for a couple days of just more intense sitting and writing, more intense contemplation, getting out of the noise. And then finally, a spiritual friend for guidance. I don't like the term spiritual director because nobody can direct the spirit, but it's great to have a friend who does have has done this work, who is a little bit farther down the road, and I do that for people. And if you feel the need for that, just contact me. We'll work something out. I mean, I've got 34 people I'm working with now, walking with. Uh, and it's quite a lot, but it's part of the joy for me just to be hanging out with people who are doing this work seriously. Uh, but it helps to have. I mean, I had a monk at the monastery, Father Gregory, for uh, 18 years that he guided me. I've had a Korean a Buddhist Zen master for 12 years, who I fought with for 12 years. And then I had the Dutch Zen master come in from Holland. Those are my three primary ones that I've had over these times. Yeah, they all help me a terrific amount, as do the spiritual friends that I walk with now. I learned so much from just interfacing with them. So if you feel the need for some kind of spiritual friend to just give you a little more guidance putting this stuff together, let me know, and if I can do it, I'll do it. If I can't do it, I have other people that can do it for you who are in this community, who have a stable practice, and they can just, you can ask them about it. Uh, Here's the last poem, and then we'll go to the sitting. This is part of a longer Rumi poem, but goes like this. Rumi knows about this stuff. He said, work. Keep digging your well. Don't ever think about getting off from work. Keep knocking. And the joy inside will eventually open a window and look out to see who's there. That's from a longer poem called Sunrise Rumi, if you've got the complete Rumi or the essential Rumi. Work, keep digging your well. Don't ever think about getting off from work. There's water down there somewhere. Keep knocking, and the joy inside will eventually open a window and look out to see who's there. The key here that I like so well, love the whole poem, that the joy is already in there waiting. And you're knocking at the door and the window opens. This is the nature of how it works. And then the joy looks out to see who's there. Yeah, keep knocking. The Dalai Lama was in Los Angeles and given a 1-day retreat. And then at the end, he took questions and answers. People walked up to a mic, and this woman said, Your Holiness, how long do we have to do this work before we start seeing some results? And he just put his face in his hands and wept. Isn't that interesting? I mean, just the fact that he knew the woman was on the wrong track. It's not a transaction. It's not like I started that way. I started meditating to deal with stress when I was teaching in high school my first year. It did that. That was, that's not why I do it now. It does help with stress, sure. It does help with blood pressure, sure. But it's not transactional. He just had to weep because he had nothing he could say to the woman. What could he say? And then I'm not sure what she took from it, but keep digging your well. Don't ever think about getting off from work. If you want to get to joy, keep digging. There's water down there somewhere. There's joy down there somewhere. Okay, I think that's good enough for today, Jill.